So I'm going to talk to you today about spinal cord segmentation in multiple sclerosis patients. I work in the medical image analysis lab. So to give you a little bit of background, why would we want to study this? So it's been shown in studies at the level of multiple sclerosis, the physical disability in multiple sclerosis patients correlates with spinal cord atrophy, where atrophy is defined as the loss of tissue in the spinal cord. So it's been suggested that if we can quantify this spinal cord atrophy, this might be a useful biomarker to allow us to monitor the progression of diseases or the effectiveness of therapies. So this brings up the question of how can we accurately measure the spinal cord. It's difficult for radiologists to measure it. They have a lot of MRIs. The MRIs are 3D. It's an easy problem. So today I'm going to present to you two different segmentation approaches that we've been working on. So the first one will be on called globally optimal spinal cord segmentation using a minimal path in 6 dimensions. So just to make sure that we're all clear what segmentation is, I think of it as a labeling problem where you have an image with voxels and you want to mark some of those as your object and some of them as background. So here we have the spinal cord marked in the red and the background there. So to talk a bit about the method, so I'll first talk about the shape. We can represent 2-dimensional axial slices of the spinal cord using principal component analysis. If we restrict ourselves just using 3 principal components, we can make the shape change and vary, as you can see in this top image here. So we can represent a shape with 6 numbers, essentially, where 3 represent the spatial coordinates, and 3 would represent the actual shape. So given a start and an end point, we can find a path in this 6-dimensional space, and that will represent our segmentation. So to try to give some intuition of what that path as a segmentation really means, we can think of a slightly simpler case where, say, we want to segment a tubular object, so we can represent an object with a sphere with a radius. So if we have a set of points here where this would be like radius of 1, radius 2, radius of 3. If we start here, we can say we're at this particular location, has a radius of 2, has a change location, has a radius of 1, change location again, radius of 1, change spatial location, radius of 2, spatial location, radius of 3, and so on. So I'll give you an overview of the pipeline. So we start out by we have training data, which is a human's gone through and marked out where the spinal cord is. We use apply PCA to learn the shape space, and we can make different axial slices that look like that. And then at runtime, a user would enter a start point and end point. And starting from the starting point, we would create a shape, and then we would check, I don't know how well you can see that, but check how well it fits the image data, and then get a score based on how well that shape fits the image data at that location. That score then becomes essentially the edge weight. If we stack all these 2D slices, we can get a three-dimensional segmentation, where we end up with this list of numbers, where the numbers represent our segmentation. And the first 3 numbers represent the spatial coordinates, the XYZ coordinate of the center of our shape, and the last 3 represent the shape itself, what it looks like. So one of the kind of challenges with this is you end up with this huge huge area to search. So I tried to kind of give a sense of that here. If we just had a 3x3 cube, if we expand this to 6 dimensions, you can see in the gray we go to 4 dimensions, green's 5, blue is 6. We get a very big area to search. Another way to visualize that I tried to show here is for every 3D pixel, you have also 3 dimensions representing the shape. So this was kind of a big challenge, is how to deal with graphs this big. So we had 2 kind of insights that helped with that. One is that we could massively prune a lot of the edges in this graph. A lot of the paths don't really make sense. Second is that we don't actually have to create the graph with all the edges prior to runtime. We can actually infer the edges at runtime, and that will drastically drop the memory from like over 100 gigabytes to 110 gigabytes by doing that. So some results, how well does this work? On the left we can see where it worked actually pretty reasonably well. Green is where it has marked as spinal cord, and red is where this method has determined spinal cord. On the right we can see that that area where it didn't work out so well, particularly here where it's latched onto the wrong boundary. And again, you can see that on the sagittal slice here, where it's again it's on the wrong boundary. So these types of problems where it would latch on the wrong boundary kind of motivated our next approach for segmentation, which was a very different a machine learning approach. We called it augmenting auto context with global geometric features. So this is like very different. It's just a machine learning where it's a classification. So we take so on the far left we can see the MRI image data an axial slice, and we would, for a particular voxel, we would sample the intensities around that voxel, and then with a classifier we're trying to classify to predict where the spinal cord would be and where the background would be. For this work, we used a random forest, which has a nice property of giving you a probabilistic output, which is why we have fuzzy values there. So the problem with just directly doing box-wise classification is you end up with these kind of patchy segmentations where you have a lot of false positives and false negatives. Previously, a couple years ago, there's an algorithm called autocontext that tries to deal with this, where it's an iterative algorithm, and what it'll do is, instead of just using, say, image information, it'll actually use these output predictions as input to another classifier, and then it'll kind of iteratively refine the classification. It'll kind of learn how to regularize the segmentation. So you can see that here, where this is in the first iteration, it gave us a really rough segmentation. Second one, there's some improvements. So our contribution in this work was that we said, well, not only can we use, say, image information and these predictions, we can also try and incorporate higher level information, where we looked at the connected components and tried to extract some sort of features from here. So you can say, like, how big are these shapes? So then we incorporated that in this auto context framework. So not only do we include the image information, the neighboring labels, we also include the information about the connected component that it belongs to. So I'll show you how this kind of works and why this is kind of a useful thing to do. In the top left-hand corner, you can see the MRI. Underneath that is where a human expert has marked as the spinal cord. So if we just look at these top rows here, this is without the geometric features that we proposed. And you can see that that's the first iteration. And then the second iteration, it kind of improves the classification. But at the final iteration, we're still left with this false positive. And if we look on the sagittal slice, we can see that it actually split the spinal cord in two, where it should just be a single connected object. When we added these global geometric features, it got rid of, you can see that the first iteration is the same, starts to regularize a little bit better. By the end of it, it removes the false positive, and it got rid of those false negatives in the middle as well. So if we compare the results from our first method up the top with the results from our updated method, or our machine learning approach, just looking at these numbers here, if we look at the Jacquard similarity, so how similar are the two images, we can see that we had a significant improvement using this machine learning approach on multiple sclerosis patients, and over here we can notice a similar improvement on non-MS or healthy patients. So to give a summary, we presented two spinal cord segmentation methods. The first one was the minimal passage in high dimensions, and the second one was the machine learning approach. And we can kind of conclude that at least for this specific data set, that the machine learning approach produces superior results. This is our first method. And that's it.
So let's thank the speaker.